so many speakers and so much clapping. I thought you might have clapping fatigue by the time you got to me, so I appreciate it. So my job is to really see the forest for the trees here and think about the big picture. What are the commonalities across the different studies, and what have we learnt, and then to also look forward and think about what can we do in the future. How can we improve these metrics and improve our analysis and understanding of diet? So what do these price indices for nutritious diets reveal? I think first, the total cost per day depends on the combination of all foods and nutrients. Many economic studies, including some we've done in other projects, have looked at particular items but not thought about the substitution across foods to achieve nutrient targets. We've also found the total cost typically exceeds the earnings for the poorest, especially when you consider the whole household and different demographic groups. And we found that the relative cost among affordable foods varies widely across space and across time, and that influences food choice. Second, food system changes could make healthier diets more affordable for all. So I think the Ethiopia study shows that yes, wages have gone up very rapidly during this economic transformation in Ethiopia, but the cost of nutritious foods has also gone up, and if that had been stable, actually there would have been much more progress on the affordability of a nutritious diet. We've also found across multiple studies seasonality, typically most acutely in fruits and vegetables. So that's a very important finding, not necessarily surprising, but the magnitudes of the effects really are quite large. So there's room to think about how can we reduce the seasonality and the cost of perishable foods in particular. Some of the studies, we would still need to explore this more, but are finding marked spatial variation by region, by type of market. I think that's something else we need to look at. This finding from Malawi is very interesting, that dietary costs are a bit lower in more remote rural areas, but we might find if we go even more remote to the very small wet markets that many rural people use, that actually some foods go up. So I think that's something we really need to dig into a little bit more. Third, price monitoring could help guide policies and programs. So there's a lot more we can do on data collection especially. Anna talked about improving the product range in Ghana. And typically what we see is when we improve the product range, the diets, these modeled least cost diets actually become more realistic. And so this sort of typical criticism of least cost diets in the past has been, that you project a very unrealistic diet. But actually when you increase the product range of the diet, we start to find consumers actually are not too bad. Poor consumers are pretty good at minimizing the cost of the diet. It just needs some tweaking at the margin. We need to improve frequency. A few studies really look at the long term. It would be great to understand food system change over the long run, as in Ethiopia and a little bit in India. But also high frequency data is important to get to seasonality issues, which we've already said are important. Representativeness is very important. Most of the countries we work in are predominantly rural, but price surveys always tend to be a little bit or a lot urban biased, and we really need to understand what's going on among more remote rural communities if we can. And then just the quality of the survey is important, not only in terms of the dimensions already mentioned, but in terms of understanding missingness. So are products not priced because they just weren't collected, or because the product simply isn't available in that market? Dissemination is really important. We need to, one of the goals of the project obviously is to raise the profile of nutritional affordability metrics and try and get uptake from governments and other agencies, and trying to get these metrics used in policy and program decision making. Use this data to guide interventions, for example. Which food items are affordable and nutritious but not yet being consumed, as opposed to products that maybe are very nutrient dense, like eggs, but are just too expensive at the moment and really need food policy interventions to drive down their long-term cost. So there's so much more for CANDASA and others to do. Some of this pertains to sort of improving the quality of the underlying data, some of it pertains to analysis, and some of it pertains to dissemination. So relatively few developing countries have official dietary guidelines, as in the India example. And we also need, those dietary guidelines to be tailored to different demographic groups, right? To pregnant women, lactating women, to young children, and so on. And so, that would help improve nutritional knowledge, but also give countries, realistic targets. We do need to refine the cost of nutrient adequacy with more on food composition and issues related to things like anti-nutrients. So there's more technical work to be done on that front, but I think we've made a good start. We need to improve price information. As I mentioned, it's very important to improve the diversity of foods, the locations, and the time period. We also need to expand the analysis to consider things, the cost of unhealthy foods and patterns. So Anna showed this great photo with a bunch of processed foods in the background, and that transformation is happening throughout the developing world. And it would be very useful to measure trends in healthy foods and unhealthy foods in the same framework. I think the use of wage and income data is novel and very important, and something that's probably not done enough with food least cost analyses. The wage data is really nice because it's high frequency, and those wage series are collected with the food price data in both India and Ethiopia. So they're collected in the same markets, and they really do give a very good picture of affordability. And there's some subtleties there because food prices affect wages and wages affect food prices. So it's not something where you want to measure high frequency data and then say take incomes from a survey elsewhere. It's very important to have high frequency wage data too, because especially in rural areas there's also seasonality in wages. And I should just add, many countries don't really collect wages or use the data when they do collect it. We want to compare least cost diets to actual diets. So we're not always saying that the least cost diet, is the diet that people should be consuming. Obviously, we want to, people to consume a realistic diet. But we tend to find that, when we measure more products, that the diets become, the least cost diets become more realistic. But we also want to understand divergence. So, for example, in Ethiopian results we didn't show, the recommended diet recommends a lot more dairy intake than what the average Ethiopian household is consuming, as well as egg intake. We want to analyze the impacts of local production, storage, and trade on diet costs. So one of the goals here is to actually understand food markets better. And I think surprisingly, speaking as an economist, we actually don't really do enough to understand markets. We do so much work with household survey data and so on, but we really need to understand markets, and not just cereal markets, but markets for nutrient-dense, non-stable foods. And we need to analyze the impact of diet costs on nutrition and health outcomes. So do these dietary metrics matter? Do they explain some of the nutrition outcomes we observe in developing countries? And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, we need to encourage uptake of nutritious food price indices. As has been mentioned by Will and Anna, every national statistical agency in the world collects food price data. Will and I have been working with the International Comparison Program at the World Bank to calculate least cost diets for a single year for 2011 for almost every country on Earth. But we don't have high frequency data from all these countries. So our utopia in this project is that almost every country in the world is using their consumer price data to monitor the cost of a nutritious diet. Many agricultural and food agencies also collect food price data, usually called agricultural marketing data. And that data too could be used to monitor nutritious diet. And throughout the world, almost all of these agencies, none of them really measure and monitor the cost of nutrition. So how do we catalyze that change? Capacity strengthening projects, such as CANDASA and such as the efforts that were described in Ghana by Daniel. Institutional collaborations. We think these nutrition price indices are a great way to get nutrition and health ministries to talk to agricultural ministries, to talk to national statistical agencies and work together. And these could also be coordinated through institutions such as the Sun Movement and national multi-sectoral nutrition strategies. And finally, we have to make this price data publicly available. This data is collected everywhere in the world, but relatively few countries post their data online. And in this project, we've had hits and misses in terms of being able to access data. So I'll leave it there and turn over back to Rajul.